Hey folks, it's Blake Butler, Executive Director of the North Carolina Industrial Hemp Association again, and welcome back to our interview series for Plant. We're very pleased to have a good friend of mine that has been in the game here in North Carolina and beyond since the beginning, since a few years before the pilot program even started, and that's Bert James from Homegrown Agriculture. Welcome, Bert.
Good morning.
Good morning, and thanks so much for joining us. As you know, it was a year ago, Bert, that we actually had the plant event in Lillington, and you were a big contributor there. But as you know, we're having to do it virtually this year.
100%. Yeah, this marks the double anniversary of Brad Todd and I telling everybody to slow down.
That's right, and let's just start right there because we've heard that common theme: scale back, be sure your hemp has a home. But I've heard you speak a couple of times, and I mean, you frame it nicely. I mean, people really have to be realistic here, just like you're starting a new business in any industry.
Absolutely. And of course, Marty Clemens, who we're both equal fans of, she and I together, I think now coined a new phrase on Facebook, the conscious curmudgeon, where you're always kind of looking at what can go wrong, so to say. Now, in addition to that, you have to look at, there's still a lot of positive things going on. We basically have a membership in the co-op that we're a part of. It's 111 farmers strong. And we told them that basically we are right now where we thought we were 5 years ago. And that, to me, is a pretty good catch-all summary of exactly what's going on in the industry.
And when you say that, Bert, I mean, give us some kind of specifics for those that, you know, are just getting into it and say where we are, because we were on quite a trajectory for a few years there.
Yeah. Well, and I would be the first to admit that it was very innocent, Blake. Everybody was so excited about the industry. They were excited about the potential, what it meant for the environment, for the economy, for small business, for small towns. And we just got caught up in the swirl of opportunity and potential. Now, 5 years later, the reality is that there was a large portion of the population that was really driving this, but it wasn't the volume that was needed to catapult it forward like we all wanted, right?
Mm-hmm.
So the reality is, you made the comment, and Marty also always makes the comment, this is not unlike any new industry. We are at a proper development phase of what will be a long-term opportunity for everybody. So what that means is you got to slow down and really take a step back and think about, what do we need right now? And what we need right now is to get steady and sound footing.
Mm-hmm.
And without farmers' participation in that, it's just going to continue to run off the rails, and you're going to continue to hear all of these sob stories.
So, Bert, let me ask you a question. So you spent some time in Canada, on the West Coast, and some of these states that have diversified. Of course, Canada is doing a lot of fiber grain. How do we pivot? Because telling the farmer that you're only going to make $600-800 an acre on the fiber, of course, we need the capital here, the processor here. How do we pivot there and kind of reimagine the diversifying on the plant?
It's going to be, the answer is not one that people want to hear. And the answer is we need big business, and we need big money. We need big capital. The grassroots effort is not going to happen fast enough for everybody's appetite. And it's certainly not for the potential that farmers possess, right? We're just a really efficient group of individuals. And that efficiency has led us to where we are, which is there's an oversupply of everything. And not to harp on the pandemic, but the hemp industry is not unlike the rest of our industries all around us. We just got a 2-month take inventory opportunity of the weaknesses in our supply chain. And so we get to learn from that, right? We should be, if we're taking this seriously, we should look at what just happened with some of the oversupply and some of the problems with the supply chain that we have. And we should take those lessons and apply it to something brand new in hemp, which currently those problems don't exist in 2/3 of the market.
Mm-hmm.
They squarely exist in the phytocannabinoid portion of the market. So the fiber and the grain, not so much.
Right. And for those farmers, growers that are going to go ahead and plant for floral purposes again without a buyer and hoping that there's going to be those new connections and those new contracts existing from processors, don't you think the key to that is we're charged with educating the public once again to get our products at the forefront? Because, you know, as you just mentioned with COVID-19, we have so much messaging coming at us at one time. We need our products should be right there at the forefront. So it seems it's almost a dual thing. As we help with the credible educational campaign, the other can come along too. But I still worry, Bert, is the contract's going to be there for the processors for some of our growers that are just going to go ahead and plant floral again.
Yeah, it's here again. And even worse than that, some of the same, misleading contracts are floating around that are basically just here to sell seed. And that's not all, but there's a whole lot of wordplay going on. If you really read deeply into the contract, there's a lot of them like, you buy our seed and we'll try to buy it back. But then it very clearly says it in the contract. However, if it doesn't meet certain criteria, then we're not obligated to buy it.
Right.
And so what's that criteria? What's that going to evolve to? So the answer is, we don't know everything at all, but we're going to slow down and just try to enjoy it, right? We're going to get away from the massive acreage and just grow enough plants that we can afford to lose the input cost. And I'm fortunate because I've got connections with Brad, Todd, Sean, Hatley, and we're prepared to pay to have our biomass processed.
Mm-hmm.
If we need to. We've got a retail brand that we've pursued, and so we're starting with that. We're starting with, okay, how many retail units does this acre represent? And if we would have started with that mindset from the onset, this would be a different conversation. The problem being is the farmers tend to get disconnected from that portion of the conversation. And despite our very best effort, and Sean and Brad are a part of this, you'll hear from Brad later on, they really tried to inform the farmers about the uses of their product, how far it would go. And despite our best efforts for now 3 years, we couldn't stop what was happening. And I think that's another new reality, is that for a little bit, we thought we might be able to actually shape this industry. And for a moment in time, I'm not sure that we didn't. We advocated really hard to keep that price for the flower up as long as we could, because we knew what the input costs were. But again, it goes back to that a little bit lofty perception. Those were not true input costs. Those were marijuana input costs. Mm-hmm. We were pursuing a model that supported really big profits at the end, and everybody got wind of that, and you couldn't stop it. Going into 2020, if you have plans to spend more than, let's say, I was saying $5,000 an acre earlier, but I'm not sure that number is not $3,500 now.
Okay.
So if you don't have a real concise plan for floral production that keeps you south of $3,500, you probably need to rethink what you're doing, and or make it an eighth of an acre. Make it 100 plants, 200 plants, 500 plants. Do the math on what you can utilize internally, and then go from there. That's a really good model.
And folks, that's the hard truth of this. And that's why we're doing this series of interviews, is we want you to be successful and sustainable. But as we said in other videos, if you're unsure, plant a garden right now. And, a few big potted plants of hemp. You have your license for 3 years. You don't have to go out there and rush anything, but be very realistic. So I like, how you phrase that, Bert, I like to hear even that you're being scaled back in your mind to realistic as being one of the leaders out there out east. I mean, that's really, really good advice. So let's just, I mean, just put it out there. A farmer calls you and says, you know, they're having a commission meeting today and says, I just been approved, Bert. What do you think I should do? And I mean, what is that kind of path? Because the guidance there, as you just mentioned, is still rolling the dice at this point.
It is. And admittedly, because of the time that we're in and the pandemic that connects us all, I'm not as in touch with all the contracts that are floating around, and I'm not as in tune with all the processors that are pushing forward and have enough revenue to ride this out. Everything is getting consolidated. We mentioned earlier in our other conversation the breweries in Asheville. That's a similar example of the processors in Asheville, right? They're all suffering the same consequence. So at the end of this year, there truly will be a different landscape, and that's something to consider. Like, there's obviously going to be less processors at the end of this year than there were at the end of last year. So that does not paint a rosy picture, for everybody's flower having a home. So I am connected with the Canadians. I still am happy to say that they're in business still. They shifted in Canada to recreational to let this kind of play out. And that wound up being a really good plan, because about the time Canada shut down, they invested in a cannabis delivery business. Go figure. Really good timing for that company.
Right, exactly.
Really good timing for that company to get a bunch of Canadians their medicine. So that being said, I just got the green light to basically pursue a project that we were working on. I was supposed to be in Wisconsin in March, and we were getting ready to push the button on a really big project. It's biomass classification. And what that is going to pursue is how to take very large volumes of biomass and get that separated into different value-added categories, so that we might better understand the ratios and the waste and the highest value portion of the crop, and then begin to market that in a different way. Mm-hmm. So I'm really excited about it. I know it's important work. I've got a lot of people waiting to hear the results from it. But that's just one way that we can move forward in a different way, right? Now your flower, for perspective, this equipment is going to basically take that flower and in very large volume and separate it out, stalk, stem, seed, flower, and then we're going to pulverize that flower and pelletize it. So that, the average industrial hemp grower, the smaller grower that's going to go out there and really take their time and grow these plants and spend that extra money, that would destroy them to hear that's what's going to happen to their plants. Mm-hmm. But that is the reality of where this industry is headed.
So you're really saying, Bert, what we're doing is being a little bit more proactive in your research and say, let's not leave so much hemp in the barn, and see if we can go ahead and get it processed to give it more of a shelf life, and then figure out where that value added supply chain is, depending on how it's processed.
Exactly right, because the current methodology, and this is what everybody was told early on, and we'll see what happens with the craft flower, or what do you guys call it?
We say craft commodity flower, but craft flower is good.
Yeah, craft flower. I like that better. So we'll see what you guys do with that bill. I know you've got some different plans that you plan on pursuing. I hope to help you with those plans, because that should not go away. That's still ridiculous. Just is, where we are as a country and even as a state at this point. I think they should put it to a public vote. We probably should get more of that going on to get the public's perception, because it's actually ridiculous that we're even considering taking that away from the farmers. That's one of the few parts of the plant that's actually maintained its value.
And I'll tell you, Bert, I've had conversations with legislators in the last few days that are telling me the attitudes are starting to shift a little bit, knowing what we're going through and have to return back to. There needs to be revenue coming from different places. We know Virginia is most likely going to legalize recreational marijuana next year. Our northern neighbor, they just passed legislation to define CBD as an additive in a food. So I think we got to, be very, very aware, like you said before, that it's worth pushing forward and not having a fight against one another. And the more law enforcement I talk to, they also don't think it's much of a priority anymore. And that might have been being pushed from Raleigh, but right now we got a whole new perspective on what's important. So I totally agree with you, and we feel good about it, as it breaks down. But, as I look at it, a lot of people ask me, well, what about our state plan, Blake? And how important is it to have a state plan? Because if they don't come back and address 315, then we're going to have to work with the folks in Raleigh to get our state plan in by the end of October. Because as you know, folks, our commission sunsets, our pilot program sunsets. And any thoughts on that, Bert? I mean, my feeling is everybody around us has submitted a state plan. So if we went under the USDA and then somehow got hung out to dry, I would not be happy.
Yeah, I've had a lot of growers, ask me that. I guess thinking that I might have some valuable perspective, and the reality is it's up in the air. So legally, if I were a lawyer, I'm sure if Tyler were here with Ward to Smith, that he'd say don't make any recommendations that could come back to haunt you. But the reality is I spoke with Paul Adams about this exact issue. And we both came to the conclusion that the likelihood of our state pilot program ending and then there being some type of consequence as though farmers were now growing an illegal crop again,
right,
it's very low. It's just very low. Our state has supported this way too much for that to happen. That's my perspective.
And folks, what Bert is referring to, really, it comes down to genetics and strains that, the USDA rules are a lot stricter as far as where we can end up. So a lot of growers are concerned about that, Bert, because they're covered now to plant the same genetics. But if we do take that shift, there might have to be a hard look. But that's a good point. No one's going to come down on us immediately. And I've even been told that the USDA might give states a little bit more time for these plans based on what's going on.
Yeah, and that would make sense. That's a logical approach. And at the end of the day, victimizing farmers is not what our government is in the business of. I know it feels that way sometimes. And the farmer that had his crop burned, I'm sure he has a different perspective than I do. But for the most part, they're very supportive of the industry. And we're just now getting clear guidelines on where some of the processing, and you said food additives, we were starting to get a lot of clarity on where this is headed. So I think another good mindset or thought process is that ends in October, right?
Right, October 31st.
So maybe you shift your plans a little bit. If you plan on having a crop, maybe you go ahead and set it out. It's May 1st, you can wait till June 1st. You can even wait till July 1st. But if you do that, the crop tends to drift a little bit, and it takes a little longer to get ready. So if you're truly concerned about it, my quick answer to one farmer was, go ahead and set your plants out.
Right.
Go ahead and plan on getting them out of the field very early in October, and you'll be covered. That's a practical approach.
So what you're saying is what I believe too. We're going to be able to work closely with the state, so no one will get hurt, and we'll have plenty of time to transition based on what paths we take. Because it brings up a great point, Bert. I had a farmer tell me yesterday that, hey, Blake, even though I've been approved to plant outdoors in my mind, I'm actually going to shift and do a small half-acre hoop house with another guy, and we're going to start it late summer after we get the money in line and everything. I said, I think that's a great idea. I think that's a very, like you said, scale back there. The guy already owns the hoop house, little greenhouse, but just putting a few plants in there and learning. I mean, that's a great idea instead of rushing it.
100%. Yeah, that time has ended, we've been trying to, you do your best with the information that you have. But we've been trying to spread that message for just like I said, going on 2 years, like, unless you are rock solid in your contract, unless you've got a large amount of money that you don't mind losing, then you need to really take a step back and focus on where the industry truly is, not what somebody's told you.
Right.
Because I think now though, the general trend is, Blake, that it's too obvious at this point. The people that were trying to mislead farmers to sell inputs, that time has ended. There's too much information out there about the market status for that to happen. However, and I guess they didn't get the memo either, but there is an excessive amount of genetics for sale.
Oh yeah. I get millions of emails like, send this to your members. This is revolutionary.
Yes. And I feel for those guys, but at the same time, that is, the word got out like, oh, the money's in the clones.
Mm-hmm.
The money's in selling the genetics. The money's in selling the seed. And so I get it. It's a free country, free market. People ran to that opportunity. And so now there's a glut of that on the market, just like there is the biomass from last year.
Right.
So already we've started off on a little bit of an odd foot. I thought that clones would be much cheaper. I thought genetics would already be much cheaper. In a lot of ways they are, but has it come down to that $3,500 an acre likelihood?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
I
think that's realistic. I like how you're even taking away from that 5 and taking it to 3,500. Mm-hmm. So folks, the hard truth, the reality from Bert James, Homegrown Agriculture, and don't get mad, get better at what you do, and that we're all trying to help and we're exchanging information. And like I mentioned, Bert's been here from the beginning. Would he want to be growing 2,000 acres? Of course he would, if the opportunity to market was there. But scale, yeah, right, with others helps. But yeah, scale back and be realistic. And I really appreciate the conversation, Bert, and appreciate what you're doing. And thanks for your friendship. And look forward to seeing you physically soon, one day when we can all get back together.
Mountains or the beach.
That's right. That's right. Thanks so much. I'll see you soon, buddy.
All right. Thanks, Blake.